Emma, I just wanted to mention to you that we're very excited because your recipe is now live on the platform, and it's looking really cool. I was very enthused this morning to get a sneak preview. Obviously, I was there at the inception of it, and the fact that we had the interview, I asked the questions behind the camera, and so it was nice to see the edited version. And it's looking really cool. And I think what I really appreciated about the new recipe is that it's really concise. The answers were super succinct, and that, I mean, these are truly bite-sized chunks of knowledge that are really helpful and practical for our businesses. So thank you for that. Thank you for participating and sharing of your knowledge. And obviously you have a lot more to share. And part of what today is all about is really about maybe getting a little bit of BTS footage, a little bit of behind the scenes of Emma Donovan and some of your unfiltered, unfettered, unedited thoughts behind digital storytelling. And I think in particular, and particularly for the audience today, and for the people who are going to be watching the recording of this interview, of this conversation, we want to know how to apply the lessons to our particular businesses. So I just wanted to say welcome, and thank you once again for being such an avid supporter of Heavy Chef. And obviously I've known you and your dad for a long time, and so it's really good to have you back on our platform.
Thanks, Fred. Yeah, great to be here and looking forward to the conversation. I think for me, that's where the magic happens, where, like you said, you can apply it to your own story, ask questions. So interested to see where it goes.
Sure. And just a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who have joined the call. I'm going to be asking a couple of questions, really specific questions that have entered into my line of thinking since watching the recipe. There's a few things that I'm curious about, and again about the application of the bites, the learning bites in the recipe to our businesses. If there is anybody on the call who would like to ask Emma a direct question about digital storytelling, about the creative process, about messaging, about growing one's business through the art of story, then if we can post those questions in the chat, and then Emma, in the sort of spirit of kind of like a Reddit Ask Me Anything, we'll go through the questions as they come up, and then I'll allow you to pick some of the questions, and if there's anything that blows your hair back, we can unpack that in the discussion. So I think from my side, I think I do have a particular question to kick off the conversation with, and it's really about the food app that you created, or you attempted to create. And I think what's interesting about that is that you were very upfront in our discussion, and you mentioned it in one of the videos on the recipe, that it was a failure, and it didn't work out. And I want to know that story, because it's often the case that we don't really put out this, the failure component of our narrative, and potentially look at the learnings that you got from that experience.
Yeah, very happy to share that. I think it was a classic case of feeling stuck and needing a change and diving into something too quickly. I think there was a number of factors, including COVID, but it was really I don't want to be in my marketing business full time anymore, but I don't know what I want to do, and food's a passion, so let me try that. And I think that was, big mistake. Number one, don't turn everything you love into a business idea. In fact, I remember someone saying to me, if something's a passion, rather steer clear of it in business. I sit somewhere between the two, because I do think it's important to have that passion in your work. But some of the challenges were starting with friends in 5 friends in 4 time zones. So just trying to get everyone on a call was quite crazy. I think everyone was at really interesting life phases. We had someone who was engaged, someone who was pregnant, someone with a newborn, someone with like exiting something. No one was like fully committed. And again, I think the driver is so important in a startup, like who's actually making this happen. And then understanding like what was needed. So once we understood the kind of scope of building the app, which now obviously has changed completely with AI, but looking back in 2020, building an app was just going to be an expense we hadn't forecasted, and we were really on the fence about bootstrapping it versus getting investment. So I think just a whole lot of contributing factors. But if I had to distill it down, I really think that jumping in head first, which is my personality, I think it was a reminder that's not always the way to make something a success. And just because you have a great idea doesn't mean that you're the right person to bring it to life. So yeah, those are some of the learnings there.
Thank
and
you.
I think, sorry, just the last thing is, it's never easy to walk away from something that you've committed to or put a lot of energy into, but the relief and the lightness I felt when we made the call not to continue was the confirmation I needed that it was the right decision. So by no means an easy one, but that feeling of lightness for me is always a good indicator.
Yeah, and I think there's so much in that answer which I can reflect upon. I mean, first of all, the combination between the sort of the head brain and the gut brain, you know, this idea of just going with your gut and you know, leaping in without a necessary plan or strategy going forward. It doesn't mean that we can't use our gut brain. I guess what you're saying, and what was interesting to me, is that you say you're still on the fence about it. And I think that's probably the correct assessment, just hearing what you have to say. We've had so many people on our platform. For example, I can think off the top of my head, Nicola Lambus, who wrote the book Side Hustles, and Craig Rodney, you know, who started Cerebra, one of the Southern Hemisphere's biggest social media agencies. Both of them echoed what you said around not making your passion your business. And I think it's there has to be a bit of balance around that, because I think it's also really important to learn how to love what you do, right? And if you don't love what you do, it's going to be very difficult to find the energy to continue doing it every day. And I think part of that, and maybe we can talk a little bit about it, is finding purpose in what you do. So it may not be, I mean, for example, I'm massively passionate about vinyl records. I'm a complete vinyl nerd, but there's no chance that I'm going to start a vinyl record business, because I know that more than likely will kill my passion for it, right? Because it'll just make it into a chore. But this thing of Heavy Chef is all about the passion for entrepreneurship. There's a lot of meaning and purpose, which gives me that passion. So I don't know if you want to unpack that a little bit, maybe in light of, you know, now with Dapper work that you're doing currently.
Yeah. I really resonate with that example. So I think looking at food, that's like fun and will always be something I enjoy. But with Dapper, there was such a sense of purpose around how do I give people confidence to own their story in a more authentic way. So that purpose was so clear for me right at the beginning. Our brand video was created in, I think, the first 6 months we had Dapper, and I still use it today. It's still on our website. I still share it sometimes in a keynote because it has the essence of what we do. And that, for me, again, it's that indicator of purpose. Like, it's consistent. The products have changed, the team's changed, but that sense of purpose gives me that excitement and that passion. And no job, no business you're going to love every day. So that's also so important for me, is to not try and see it through rose-tinted glasses, to be real. to realize that there's still going to be the tough days. There's going to be days without motivation. But if you have that purpose and discipline, it's so much easier to keep building.
Yeah, it's such an elegant balance that we have to define. It's not the thing that we love absolutely, like you say, like food or whatever it is, but it's the end result. It's the thing that we're trying to impact and create a transition within that area, right? And so then if we take this craft of storytelling, and particularly let's zero in on the kind of personal nature of storytelling. Can you unpack why is it so important that we learn to tell these personal stories as entrepreneurs?
I think at a kind of basic level, it's that people buy from people. And you might not be selling by telling a story, but ultimately we are all in business needing to retain clients or attract clients or partners or whatever it is. So I think, again, being realistic, like that is part of the objective. But I think it goes so much deeper than that. And for me, I mean, one of my top 3 values is connection. So to have human connection, there needs to be a story and there needs to be depth. I've seen it with a lot of clients who post regularly on LinkedIn, but they're always just talking about their products. And they're not giving any of that behind the scenes, any humor, any insights into who they are. And I know there's so much personality there, but it's being almost like kept behind a mask. So I think it's just, again, it's about like that owning your story, not overthinking it. And I think what most people find difficult, and I still struggle with it, is how do you get the balance between personal and oversharing? And I think it was Brene Brown who said, you don't have to tell everyone everything. People, I think she said, people earn the right to hear your story. And I like that idea that, like, yes, have some vulnerability, share some of the narrative, but be selective about where you do it and to what depth. And I think that just comes with practice of what do you feel comfortable with, what is contributing to the narrative you're building, the purpose that you're guided by.
I think that's such a great point. It's storytelling is not about just, I guess, throwing out word salad into the social media space and just trying to desperately convey some kind of message that has vulnerability and emotions in it. It's more around crafting a story that is meaningful. And we've had a few people talk about the importance of storytelling. It's really picked up its pace and momentum over the last few years since Donald Miller published Story Brand. We're seeing the importance of when an organization or a small business or a company has a good story, that it really plays such a vital role in the success and growth of a company, right? And so I think then I want to talk about or I'd like to broach the topic of how a personal story, like in terms of the entrepreneur's story versus the business's story, and maybe how we can, not only distinguish the difference between them, but also how we can forge some kind of a relationship between them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's about finding alignment and synergy, but not having the same content going out from a founder's profile and a company profile. So I think sharing each other's content makes sense, even if you're the one posting both, which in a small business you're going to be. So it can sometimes feel silly to share your company's post, your profile, but try and put different hats on. And like some clients literally will put on a different hat. And again, it sounds silly, but if you're sitting at home by yourself, like, no one's going to see it off in the office. Maybe it becomes, part of the kind of banter and culture. But the idea being like, whose voice am I using? So being clear on each voice is really important. For your own brand, I always say, would you say it like that in conversation? If you were talking to someone, a colleague or, someone in your professional circle, would you feel like your post, would you be able to just say that and it sound natural? So I think that helps from a personal lens. And then from a company page, it's less is more. Again, people often try and share too many details, about a product or a service. They're not creating curiosity or intrigue or, getting people's attention. They're trying to like do that sort of, what did you call it? The kind of fruit salad of like just getting everything out there. So I think simplifying it, trying to mix up, written content with video is really important. If you can have video content, and again, not like studio shot perfect video, but like just kind of create that human connection. So yeah, clear on the voice, sharing content where it's relevant, and trying to avoid duplicate content. So those would be a couple of things to keep in mind.
If I then look at, for example, the Heavy Chef story, right? And I mean, I have my own story. I used to be in digital advertising. Now I'm in, this new field of education, which I came into a little bit clueless, and we've been growing like really, really fast, and trying to, I guess, identify the path as we're cutting through the bushes, and it feels almost like this, like we're pioneers in a land that we have no idea what's around the next corner. I think one of the things that's really helped me a lot is when crafting the business story, that it's a standalone story, that the Heavy Chef story is different to, say, the Fred story, or my co-founders' stories, and the story of Heavy Chef is not about Heavy Chef being the hero of that story. It's really about, us being the guide or the sage, or, the I suppose the wise person who can assist the hero. And the hero in our case is the small business entrepreneur. And I think, having that framework of the story, and you speak about it in the recipe, is really, really helpful. And I see Carmen actually has a great question here that kind of relates to that. When we have our set story, our framework, the thing, like in Heavy Chef's case, our story, which is really about inspiring and empowering entrepreneurs, how do we stay true to our brand and our story while still using the trends and the shifts in the macro environment to our advantage? Makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think for me, it's about being true to your story first, and then going, where can we draw on trends or what's happening in the industry? I think if you do it the other way around, you can get a bit lost along the way. And also to like figure out if you are going with the current. So sometimes we're so set on going straight, and if you picture a river, I love this analogy of like going on a canoe down a river, and you so determined to go straight that you'll like carry your canoe across the bank to stay straight, instead of going, let's see where this takes me. So brands evolve over time, we evolve. So trying to stick to a script too much, I think, can be limiting. And again, you don't want to go the other extreme and have no script or no framework, but just that like ease and flow to figure it out along the way, especially if you're growing fast or evolving your business as you build it, which most of us are doing. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, Carmen. I don't know if you want to add to the question.
No, good. Thank you so much.
Oh.
So I see that Louis has, I feel, asked a question that is on many of our minds, and that is this content quicksand. In the old days of digital marketing, we used to say content is king. And it just seems like, I mean, how can you be king when there's, billions of people just spewing out content all the time? And the trap, I guess, is for us to spend all our time on that. And how do we avoid that trap? What is the way of cutting through all of that noise?
So firstly, I love the content quicksand. I might borrow that phrase. For me, it's about not feeling like you've got to keep up and create more content. Going, does this add value? Firstly, and secondly, to think of your brand beyond LinkedIn. It's how you connect with people in person. It's how you do your team meeting in the morning. All of those are part of your brand story. And I think we get very caught up on, for example, LinkedIn, or maybe it's YouTube, or wherever you are spending time creating content. And that it's so easy to get caught up in it rather than saying quality over quantity, rather than saying, does this add value? Does it contribute to the narrative? I've noticed with a lot of content creators, I mean, some of the people who are like nailing it, post every day, and they've got a formula that works. But for most people, I feel like if you post every day, you're actually just losing traction. Whereas if you post less frequently and put energy into it and enjoy doing it, then the engagement is likely to start to ramp up.
Related to that question, I think, you know, with the idea of conveying one story, getting the messages out there. Now we have our story, we've got our protagonists, we understand where we sit, and we understand who the hero of our story is. In other words, our client or our customer.
Mm-hmm.
I think Nikki has asked a great question in terms of repurposing content. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there, and you know, it's very difficult to understand who's actually right and who's wrong. I mean, you know, there's, for example, Gary Vaynerchuk, who has his content triangle, and he's all about repurposing content. So you have, you know, Nikki asked advice on repurposing content, the spirit of keeping the message focused. So this idea of duplicating content versus repurposing content, is there a difference? And you know, how would we be able to use that in our own context as small business owners?
Yeah. So I do think there's a difference. I think repurposing is being strategic. If you've got a great piece of content, how can you repurpose it for different platforms? And again, that's where is your hero? Where is your customer? And how are they likely to consume it? So I think often starting with a thought leadership piece or a blog post, like a longer form piece of content, and then going, how do I repurpose it for social media, for a newsletter, for internal comms? It can be the other way around. You can do a quick, you know, social media post and then go actually have more to say on that and elaborate on it. But yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I'm guilty of not doing it well or often enough. But I think that it's a great strategy and a very like time effective way to create quality content.
Carmen asked a follow-up question: with so much noise out there, what advice would you give someone to trying to find their own unique voice? And this is something that you obviously are quite passionate about, and you've spoken about in the recipe. Can you just unpack that a little bit? I think the idea of a unique voice is a really, really powerful idea.
Yeah. So I think interesting that what came to mind is looking at how you use AI. So I use a paid version of Claude, and I spend quite a lot of time on prompts and then quite a lot of time editing any draft that I get Claude to do. But often I go back and correct the tone, which I find really interesting because I spent an hour or two on my like style initially, like this is how I want to talk, this is not. And what I'm finding is I go back and I say, that's way too cheesy, that's too long, that's too this, it's too that. And I found it such a helpful way to refine my own tone, because if you think of like I find it easier to edit something than to start from a blank page. And again, I think that's skill and personality based. But if that resonates, that idea of editing is like, get something drafted by Claude or ChatGPT and tell them what's wrong with it. How do you refine it? So that's maybe a different strategy to use. And then more traditional things are kind of just being really clear on your values, your voice. If you Google tone of voice and you get 50 words, circle 3 or 4 that resonate, and then be really practical. Though, what's a sentence or a draft post I can do that has that tone? Or almost writing a post in 3 different styles or voices and going, which one is me? Maybe ask someone who knows you well, say, which of these sounds like me? But be careful of other people's opinions, because I think at the end of the day, it's that being comfortable in your skin, and everyone will give you a different opinion on it. So yeah, hopefully some of those will be useful.
AI has become such a hot ticket item in terms of strategy and I mean, I guess in your field in consulting, because some people will say, like, you know, they will regale in horror to the suggestion of starting with AI. And then others are like, for example, you just mentioned, you know, let's start with AI and then start to infuse our own voice in it. Whether we like it or not, there is going to be a real requirement for AI to help us to boost and grow our businesses, particularly as we're working more remotely. And in terms of being able to create content, it's you either use it or you're going to be left behind. So I think with regards to storytelling, I mean, how can we find that gap? Because I think the other thing, just to add context to it, when we see content that's written by AI, it's actually quite obvious. I mean, I put on a video. I often have YouTube videos on my big TV screen that just has like 100 places in the world you've never visited before, and it has an AI voice over it, and it is so unbelievably badly written in terms of the script. You can hear that it's AI. So how do we avoid that? What is the kind of middle ground in terms of strategically plugging in this tool that we simply have to use, or we're going to be left behind?
Yeah, I certainly resisted it for a while, and now I'm loving it because I see it as a colleague. It's like a constant conversation, and I'll push back on everything because what I've found is that it's always told me how wonderful I am and how great my ideas are. And like, no, they need refining. Like, this is the first draft. So just almost being a bit cheeky and being like, can you do better? I got a list of questions for an icebreaker and they were so generic. And I said, these are really generic. Please try harder. And I got a much better list. And then I said, okay, I'm going to take 5 of these and I'm going to add 5 of my own. So a collaborative approach for me is really important. And then if you're in a rush and you're like, oh, I'll just use it as it is, rather don't use it at all. Like, take that time. It's like one of my favorite sayings is meditate for 10 minutes a day. Unless you don't have time, then meditate for an hour a day. So same with AI, like, do it properly, make it collaborative, put that human energy in, or don't use it. If you're doing it to cut corners, I think it's not going to land. But if you're using it strategically and like refining your thinking, refining your drafts, refining your tone, then it can be really fun and can save a lot of time.
That's great. It's kind of like we have to delegate to AI, not abdicate to it. So it's, there's a collaboration that actually works with that. And delegating it means that we need to be precise. We need to have a feedback loop. There needs to be attention and presence in terms of our involvement with it, rather than just giving it a task and assuming that it's going to be done to the correct criteria that we have stipulated for our brand story architecture. And so Randall has asked the question. He has a photography business and he's a portrait photographer. So in terms of building a brand that's visually timeless, how can Randall use digital storytelling to communicate the deeper meaning behind images, not just push out the final product?
Yeah, I think it's such a fun playground when you've got beautiful visual content to work with, because there's so much you can do with it. And I think people love learning about the process and the story and learning about you. So Randall, I've got a little bit of a head start because we've met, but I think just meeting you briefly when we filmed the video for the recipe, I just feel like you've got such an interesting story to tell. And you're one of those people who listens first. And I think that's a superpower. I think, Fred, we both like to jump in and keep talking. Whereas Randall, like when he does speak, there's something like really interesting about the space you hold. So I would like harness that superpower. And people often think, oh, well, no one cares about my story or the backstory. But I think they do. I think most people, if they appreciate your work and your creativity, do want to hear some of that story. And so, yeah, behind the scenes backstory. It's always difficult to promote your own work. So the more you can have client feedback as part of that story, I feel like that's a great way to get the like affirmation and credibility without having to do it yourself. Yeah.
There's a point that you made, which I just want to jump on, and there's a couple more questions in the chat, but I want to just quickly talk around some of there's a really, I mean, there's a lot of practical advice that you provide and perspective and so on, but there's something that is maybe a little bit more difficult for many of us to implement within our small businesses. And that's this idea of vulnerability and emotions. Right now, I mean, I know you've read Brené Brown, and